The galaxy had once been a thriving collection of civilizations, each unique in their own ways, sharing knowledge, technology, and culture. Planets hummed with life, and the stars themselves seemed to sparkle with promise. But now, that galaxy was a shadow of its former self. The once vibrant worlds had become desolate, abandoned by their people, lost to the ravages of time, greed, and war. Even the stars seemed to flicker weaker, as if mourning the death of a once great civilization. In the heart of this dying galaxy, humanity stood alone, clinging to its ideals like a single, fragile flame in the wind. And yet, even as the darkness closed in, humanity remained steadfast in its mission: to protect the weak, no matter the cost. On the barren planet of Arctis 9, Captain Alina Hart stood at the command center, looking out at the shattered skyline. Her fingers brushed against the cold glass, her mind far away, lost in the grim thoughts of what had brought them here. The message had come through only hours ago, an encrypted transmission from a long-forgotten alien race, the last of their kind. The message was clear, almost chilling in its simplicity. Do not protect the weak. It is a waste. You cannot win. You will lose everything. The galaxy was dying. The once powerful species who had ruled for eons had fallen silent. The great empires had crumbled, and only the void remained. Some said it was a result of natural disaster, while others believed the old gods had turned their backs on the galaxy. But there was one thing that united all the survivors, one thing that kept humanity from slipping into despair: the belief that no matter how dark the galaxy became, no matter the challenges they faced, the weak must be protected. It was a belief ingrained deep in humanity's core, a belief that refused to die. Captain Hart, her face hard with resolve, knew the message from the aliens was a warning to abandon that ideal. She had heard the stories, the old tales of worlds ravaged by war, of civilizations destroyed by greed, of the galaxy's steady march toward oblivion. But she refused to believe that the very thing that had kept humanity alive was the cause of their downfall. The weak needed them. If they lost that belief, then what would be left of them? What would be left of the human race? As she stared into the distance, Alina couldn't help but think of the people who depended on her. She thought of the families hidden in the underground bunkers on the last remaining safe worlds. She thought of the children, the elderly, the sick, and the vulnerable who had nowhere else to turn. They had no choice but to trust humanity to protect them. And humanity would not fail them. "Captain, the message is ready for broadcast," came a voice from behind her. It was Lieutenant Zane, her trusted second-in-command. His face was grim, as if the weight of the galaxy was resting on his shoulders. Alina turned toward him, her face softening for a brief moment. Zane had been with her from the beginning, through every mission, every challenge. He was the kind of officer who never wavered, even when the odds were impossible. And now, as humanity's final hope, he stood beside her, ready to face the unknown. She nodded and turned toward the communications console. The message from the fallen alien race was a threat, a statement of their survival instincts. The aliens had warned them to stop trying to protect the weak, to abandon the notion of compassion in the face of the galaxy's collapse. But humanity's response was simple: we will protect the weak. We will protect everyone. As the transmission went live, Alina's voice rang out over the comms, her words resolute. "This is Captain Alina Hart, leader of the Human Alliance. The galaxy may be dying, but humanity will not give up on its core values. We will not abandon the helpless. We will fight to the last breath to protect them, no matter the cost." Her message echoed across the galaxy, reaching distant planets and distant ears, even those who no longer had faith in the human race. There was no immediate response, just the cold silence of space. But Alina knew it wouldn't be long before the enemy responded. The warning from the alien race had been clear. They were coming for humanity's last stronghold, coming to end the belief that had defined them for so long. They would test humanity, push it to its breaking point, and Alina knew that this time, the battle would not just be for survival, It would be for the very soul of humanity. The message was sent. The galaxy had been warned. But the fight was far from over. As she looked out at the darkened sky, Elena's mind raced. She had made her choice. Humanity had made its choice. The path was clear, and there was no turning back. The enemy would come, and they would do everything in their power to destroy what little was left of the galaxy. But humanity would fight. They would fight for the weak, for the helpless, and for the future of the galaxy. The fall of the galaxy had already begun, but for Captain Elena Hart and the rest of humanity, it was just the beginning of their final stand. The silence of the galaxy was deafening. Across the vast, empty expanse of space, the stars burned dimmer, the light of civilizations once proud now snuffed out. The war had claimed everything, from grand empires to humble colonies, and now only a few remained, struggling against the inevitable collapse. Humanity had defied the odds for generations, but even they were feeling the weight of time. They stood at the edge of nothingness, clinging to their last hope, the belief that the weak, the helpless, and the vulnerable deserved protection, no matter the cost. Captain Elena Hart paced back and forth in the command center of the Human Alliance's flagship, the Valiant. Her mind raced, trying to process the message that had arrived just hours ago. The message was a warning from the very species that had once stood as the galaxy's most advanced race, now reduced to nothing. Their last desperate transmission had echoed through space, but its message was clear and haunting. Do not protect the weak. It is futile. You will all die. The words haunted Elena as she sat in her chair, staring at the holographic display that flickered with images of distant star systems. The words from the fallen species had struck a chord in her, sowing seeds of doubt in her mind. The aliens had seen the galaxy crumble before their eyes, and now they believed that humanity's obsession with protecting the weak would be the end of them all. And yet, despite everything, she refused to give up on her conviction. Elena leaned forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the command table. "What do you think, Zane?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Zane, her ever-faithful lieutenant, stood at attention beside her. His eyes met hers with a solemn gaze. He, too, had heard the message, and like Elena, it had stirred something deep within him, a deep sense of dread. The alien race had been powerful once, and their warning was not one to take lightly. But Zane knew Elena. He knew she would not simply abandon their ideals. She couldn't. Not now. "We fight," Zane said firmly. "Humanity's strength has always been our compassion. If we lose that, we lose everything." Elena nodded slowly, a sense of determination filling her chest. Zane was right. Without compassion, without the will to protect the weak, they would become nothing but another empire crumbling into the void. She would not let that happen. "The galaxy may have fallen," Elena muttered, "but humanity will rise." The quiet hum of the command center suddenly cut off, and the soft voice of Lieutenant Carrick came through the comms, breaking the silence. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission. It's from the enemy." Elena's heart skipped a beat. The enemy? The enemy was always near, always lurking in the shadows. But now, with the transmission from the aliens still echoing in her mind, Elena had the distinct feeling that this enemy was something far more dangerous. "Patch it through," Elena said, her voice steady despite the surge of anxiety in her chest. The holographic screen flickered, and a cold, metallic voice filled the room. It was not a human voice, nor one that was familiar to her. "Humanity," the voice said, "you have defied the warning. You have chosen to continue this foolish path. You will soon find out why the galaxy begged you to stop." Elena's fists clenched. The message was clear. The enemy knew what they stood for, and they were coming to destroy it. You will not protect the weak. You will not fight for what is futile. We will tear down your walls, break your spirit, and erase the very idea that you cling to. The voice continued, its words sharp as a blade. The message ended with a chilling finality, leaving nothing but an overwhelming sense of impending doom. The enemy was coming. They were coming to destroy everything humanity had worked for, to rip away their hope and leave them with nothing. Elena took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She turned to Zane, her resolve as strong as steel. "We knew this day would come," Elena said, her voice quiet but unwavering. "The message from the alien race, the warnings from others, they were right about one thing. We're outnumbered, but we will not surrender. We will stand our ground." Zane met her gaze, his expression serious. "We fight for the weak. We fight for those who have no voice. We fight because it's who we are." Elena nodded, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope, even as the dark clouds of war gathered overhead. The message from the fallen species and the threat from the enemy were only the beginning. There was still one thing that would set humanity apart from all the other dying civilizations of the galaxy: their unwillingness to abandon their principles. "We may be on the brink of destruction," Elena said, her voice growing more determined. "But humanity has faced the impossible before, and we will face it again. We fight not just for survival, but for what is right. And no matter what happens, we will protect the weak." As the fleet of human ships gathered in the depths of space, preparing for the oncoming battle, Elena's thoughts turned once more to the message she had received, the warning to stop protecting the weak. The galaxy was dying, and some said it was too late. But Elena believed otherwise. She believed that if humanity continued to fight for those who couldn't protect themselves, they would be the last light in a galaxy shrouded in darkness. The final battle was about to begin, and as the stars above burned dimly, humanity would make its stand. The calm before the storm was almost unbearable. As Captain Elena Hart stood at the command console aboard the Valiant, she could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders. The enemy's transmission was still fresh in her mind. "We will tear down your walls, break your spirit, and erase the very idea that you cling to." Elena could see their faces now, the faces of the helpless, of those depending on humanity's promise of protection. These were the ones she had sworn to defend, and she would not let them down, no matter the cost. But the threat was real. The enemy was coming, and they weren't coming just to fight. They were coming to destroy the very heart of what humanity stood for. "We're running out of time," Zane said, his voice low and urgent, snapping Elena out of her thoughts. She turned to look at him, seeing the same resolve in his eyes. Zane had always been the one to remind her that no matter the odds, they had to keep fighting. And today, that was more important than ever. "What's the status on the fleet?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in her mind. "We've got about 200 ships in orbit," Zane replied, tapping away at his console. "But with the enemy fleet still out there, we can't be sure it'll be enough. Their numbers are vast. We need to prepare for a battle unlike anything we've ever seen." Elena's mind raced. She had prepared for many battles before. This wasn't her first fight for survival. But this was different. This wasn't just a fight for resources or territory. This was a fight for the very soul of humanity. They couldn't back down. Not now. Not when they were so close to losing everything. "I want everyone on high alert," Elena ordered, her voice sharp. "We may not have much time before they arrive. Get the fleets into formation and prepare the defenses. I want our ships ready to strike the moment they show up." Zane nodded and turned to give the orders. Elena watched him leave, her mind whirling with the choices she had to make. She knew that the coming battle wouldn't just be won with weapons and tactics. It would be won with something far stronger: the will to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As the fleet prepared for battle, Elena retreated to her quarters, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger. The alien message had shaken her, but it had also galvanized her. The enemy wasn't just trying to destroy their fleet. They were trying to destroy everything humanity stood for. But as long as Elena was breathing, they would never succeed. Elena sat in front of her console, her fingers hovering over the keys. She had one last message to send. The message she had prepared earlier had been enough to rally the fleet and strengthen the resolve of the people, but now she needed to send something more. She needed to remind everyone why they fought. Humanity's final stand isn't about survival. It's about the weak. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. We fight because that is what makes us human. We fight for what is right. She paused, taking a deep breath. Her message wasn't just for her fleet. It was for everyone in the galaxy who still had hope, who still believed in humanity's promise to protect the weak. It was for the families hiding in bunkers, the children on dying worlds, the ones who had nowhere else to turn. Alina hit send. The message was broadcasted throughout the galaxy, reaching every corner of the known universe. She knew the enemy would hear it. But what she didn't know was whether it would be enough to turn the tide. The fleet was ready. The message had been sent. Now, all that remained was to wait for the enemy to make their move. Hours passed, but the enemy did not arrive. The uncertainty grew thicker with each passing minute. Were they simply waiting for the right moment to strike? Or were they preparing to unleash a force so overwhelming that humanity wouldn't stand a chance? Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared. Alina's heart leaped into her throat. She had expected this, but the reality of it still hit her like a wave crashing against a cliff. Enemy ships detected, the communications officer shouted. They're coming in fast. It looks like a full assault. Battle stations. Alina commanded. We've trained for this. We know what to do. Get ready to fight. We will not let them erase us. The Valiant shook as the first enemy missiles slammed into their shields. Alina gritted her teeth, feeling the ship groan beneath the impact. The enemy had arrived, and they were not pulling any punches. We need to hold them off, Zane called over the comms, his voice tense. They're breaking through our defenses. Captain, we need a strategy, and we need it fast. Alina's mind raced as she assessed the situation. The enemy had sent wave after wave of their most powerful ships, and their firepower was unmatched. But there was something they didn't understand. Humanity had survived by standing together. They had survived by fighting for each other. We fight, Alina said, her voice steady as she surveyed the battlefield. We will not back down. We will not surrender. Protect the weak, and protect each other. The ships under her command rallied, pushing back against the enemy assault. The battle raged on, ship against ship, fighter against fighter. But there was a fire in humanity's heart, something the enemy could never have prepared for. The unbreakable spirit of those who refused to surrender, no matter the odds. As the hours passed and the fighting grew more intense, Alina knew that this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything humanity stood for. And no matter what happened, they would never stop fighting for the weak. The battle had already been raging for hours, and the human fleet was taking heavy casualties. The Valiant shields were holding, but barely. The enemy's ships, massive and relentless, tore through the void with terrifying precision. Missiles exploded on contact, sending shockwaves through the fleet, while enemy fighters swarmed like an unending tide of destruction. Captain Alina Hart stood at the command center, her jaw clenched in determination. The view on the screen showed her fleet's formation, now in disarray. The enemy wasn't just trying to kill them. They were trying to break them, to tear apart their resolve. Alina's mind raced, but there was no time for hesitation. Humanity had already committed to this battle, and backing down was not an option. Status report, Alina shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos of the command center. Captain, the enemy fleet is stronger than anticipated, said Lieutenant Kara, her voice trembling slightly. Our fighters are losing ground, and we've taken significant damage. We need reinforcements, or we won't be able to hold them off much longer. Alina's heart sank. They were losing. The enemy was more powerful, more ruthless than any opponent they had faced before. But she wouldn't give up. Not now. Not when there were still people to protect. Where's the nearest ally? Alina asked, turning toward Zane, her most trusted officer. There are a few scattered fleets still in the region, but they're too far to reach in time, Zane replied, his brow furrowed with concern. Even if they could arrive, their strength won't be enough to turn the tide. Alina closed her eyes for a moment, taking in a slow, steadying breath. She could feel the weight of the universe bearing down on her, the pressure of her responsibility crushing her chest. But she refused to let it break her. She had a choice to make: surrender or keep fighting. "We are not giving up," Alina said, her voice resolute, cutting through the tension. "Our greatest strength has always been our unity. Humanity has faced insurmountable odds before, and we've always come out stronger." Her words were filled with fire, but even she knew that simply believing wasn't enough. She needed a plan, a way to turn the tide in their favor. "We can't just play defense. We need to hit them where it hurts," Alina said, glancing at the tactical map. Her mind raced through the possibilities. It was time to take the fight to the enemy. "Lieutenant Kara, prepare a strike force. We'll launch a counterattack on their flagship. If we can take out their command vessel, we may be able to disrupt their control and buy ourselves some time." Kara hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over her console. "Captain, it's a suicide mission. Their flagship is heavily guarded." "I know," Alina replied, her eyes hardening with determination. "But if we don't do something drastic, we won't have a fleet to command, and we won't have any hope left. If humanity is to survive, we have to fight for it." There was a heavy silence in the room as everyone absorbed the gravity of her words. Zane was the first to speak, his voice unwavering. "We'll fight with you, Captain, whatever it takes." Alina met his gaze, her heart filled with gratitude. The loyalty of her crew was unshakable. She would not let them down. The plan was set into motion. The Valiant's remaining fighters were quickly deployed, and a small strike team was prepared for a daring mission: to infiltrate the enemy flagship and disable it, using everything they had left. As Alina stood before the large view screen, watching as her fleet prepared for its most desperate move yet, she thought back to the message from the fallen galaxy, the one that had warned humanity not to protect the weak. She could still hear the enemy's voice, cold and confident. "You will fail. The galaxy will remember your fall." But Alina refused to believe that. She refused to let the weight of failure crush her spirit. No, humanity's story wasn't over. Not while there was still a fight to be fought. She turned to the crew around her. "We are humanity's last hope. We protect the weak, and we fight for those who can't fight for themselves. We will win. And if we don't, we go down fighting, knowing that we did everything we could." With those final words, the ship shuddered again as enemy fire hit it once more. But this time, Alina didn't flinch. She wasn't just fighting for her crew anymore. She was fighting for the soul of humanity, for the very ideals they had lived by. The strike force was ready. The fleet moved into position, preparing for a final assault. But just as the fighters launched, the sensors detected something unexpected. A massive pulse of energy coming from the enemy flagship. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a signal to every enemy ship in the region. Alina's heart sank as the realization hit her. The enemy wasn't just trying to win this battle. They were calling reinforcements. And the reinforcements weren't just coming from one direction. They were coming from every corner of the galaxy. A new wave of enemy ships appeared on the horizon, their numbers almost overwhelming. The enemy had called in a fleet that could crush anything in their path. Alina's heart raced as the tide of battle suddenly became even more impossible to overcome. But in that moment of despair, Alina found her strength. She knew what had to be done. She wasn't just going to protect her people. She was going to lead them into the fight of their lives. "Prepare to engage all enemy targets. We are not backing down," Alina commanded, her voice strong and unwavering. "Humanity will be remembered, no matter the cost." The moment Alina saw the endless enemy ships appearing from the dark void of space, her heart seemed to stop. Their numbers were astronomical. Every inch of the stars now seemed to belong to the enemy, and it was only a matter of time before they swallowed up humanity's last hope. But Elena wouldn't let her people fall. Not now. Not after everything they had fought for. She clenched her fists, looking out at the blackness of space, the flashing lights of a battle already in full force. "We can't back down," Elena whispered to herself. "Not now. Not ever." The communication system buzzed, and Zane's voice broke through the tension. "Captain, we've got incoming fighters. They're moving fast. Keep the shields up. Don't let a single one get through." Elena shouted, her voice steady but urgent. "We'll take them down one by one. Stay in formation, everyone." Her orders rang out with certainty, but inside, she could feel the pressure mounting. The ships were coming from every direction. Waves of enemy fighters closing in on the Valiant's fleet. If they didn't strike first, they'd be overwhelmed within minutes. Elena turned to Zane, who was analyzing the incoming enemy ships on his screen. His eyes narrowed as he took in the numbers. "They're not just attacking the fleet," he said grimly. "They're trying to destroy our weapons systems. They want to break our will, Captain." Elena's mind raced. If the enemy succeeded in disabling their weapons, they wouldn't be able to fight back at all. Humanity's last chance at survival would be lost. "We need to change the tide. Now," Elena said with absolute conviction. She quickly formulated a new plan. The enemy was focused on their weapons systems. If they could just draw the enemy's attention away long enough, they could launch a surprise counterattack. It would be risky, but it was their only chance. "Lieutenant Kara," Elena said, turning to her, "we need to lure them in. Draw their fighters away from our defenses." Kara nodded. "On it, Captain. I'll prepare a small group to make the first strike." "Good," Elena said. "And Zane, I want you to prepare our fighters. We'll hit them while they're distracted." The tension in the air was almost palpable. Every second felt like an eternity. Elena's heart pounded as she watched her crew jump into action, following her orders without hesitation. This was their last stand, the final fight. If they failed, there would be no more chances, no more hope. The Valiant shuddered as enemy fire hit the shields again. They were under attack from all sides. Elena steeled herself for what was to come. "Let's make them regret ever underestimating humanity," Elena said, standing tall in front of her crew. The ships were ready to go. Elena watched as her strike force launched into space, their engines roaring as they cut through the battlefront toward the heart of the enemy fleet. Every ship that passed her window reminded her of the stakes. Each of these men and women, each of these brave souls, was willing to die for the cause. They were humanity's last defense, and Elena wasn't going to let their sacrifices be in vain. The Valiant was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's spirit, and that spirit was about to be tested like never before. As the first wave of enemy fighters rushed forward, the human fleet engaged. Elena's plan was working. The enemy's attention shifted, and they focused on the smaller group of fighters, allowing the main force to break through their lines. The Valiant's guns flared to life, tearing into the enemy ships, sending them spiraling into the black void. But just as the human fleet began to gain ground, the situation changed. The enemy flagship, the one they had been planning to destroy, fired a devastating energy pulse. The beam slammed into the Valiant, sending the ship into a violent spin. Elena was thrown to the floor as the ship's emergency alarms blared, but she quickly regained her footing. The Valiant was damaged, but it was still standing. They still had a chance. "Report," Elena demanded, grabbing onto the console for support. "We're still here, Captain," Zane said, his voice tight with urgency. "But the pulse knocked out our auxiliary systems. Shields are failing." Elena's heart raced. The enemy had just hit them with one of their most powerful weapons. She needed to act fast before the Valiant was completely disabled. "Hold on. We're not giving up," Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare for a full strike on the enemy flagship. All remaining fighters, I want you to engage their command ship with everything you've got." Zane's eyes met hers, filled with both determination and fear. "We'll do it, Captain. We're with you. The enemy flagship loomed in front of them, massive and imposing, like a black hole waiting to swallow them whole. Alina knew this was it, their final move. If they could take down the flagship, they could cripple the enemy's forces, but it would mean a direct confrontation, and they were severely outgunned. Alina closed her eyes for a brief moment. The stakes were unimaginable, but she couldn't let doubt creep in. This was the only option they had. They had to win for the weak, for the innocent, for the future of humanity. The fleet surged forward, pushing all their remaining power into one final strike. Missiles streaked toward the enemy flagship, explosions lighting up the dark expanse of space. The Valiant and its fighters closed in, making their move in a desperate bid for survival. Now, Alina cried. The battle intensified, both sides locked in a deadly struggle. The enemy flagship retaliated, but it was too late. A direct hit from the Valiant's remaining firepower took out the flagship's shields, and then another missile hit its core. The flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, sending shockwaves throughout the battlefield. Alina felt a brief moment of relief. An opening had been created, but there was still much to do. The enemy was far from defeated. "Don't stop now," Alina shouted. "We've still got work to do." As the battle raged on, Alina watched as her crew fought with everything they had left. This was humanity's last stand. It wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the very values that had always defined them. Protecting the weak, standing together, and never giving up, no matter the odds. The battle was far from over, but humanity had shown the galaxy what they were made of. And that was all Alina needed to know. The crew, their faces set with grim determination, rallied around her. In that moment, they were all united in a singular purpose: to protect the weak, to fight for what was right, and to ensure that humanity would never, ever give up. The battle for the galaxy had only just begun. The enemy flagship had been destroyed, but Alina knew it wouldn't be enough to win the battle. The explosion sent a shockwave through the battlefield, and for a brief moment, the attacking forces hesitated. It was as if the very foundation of their confidence had cracked. The humans had dealt a serious blow, but the galaxy's mightiest enemies were not easily defeated. Alina gripped the rail tightly as the Valiant lurched forward, shaking from the impact of enemy fire. Her crew was battered, exhausted, but they were still fighting. She knew their resolve, their will to protect the weak, was their greatest weapon. And it was this strength that gave her hope in the face of overwhelming odds. "Captain, the enemy is regrouping," Zane said, his voice calm despite the situation. "They're preparing another wave. It's bigger than the last one." Alina nodded grimly. They were on borrowed time. The human fleet had already sustained significant damage. Their fighters were running low on fuel, and their weapons were nearly depleted. The Valiant had taken multiple hits, and their auxiliary systems were still down. Yet, even with all that, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something they could do. "The fleet needs to fall back," Alina said, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We can't continue to hold them off. But we're not retreating. We're regrouping. I want all remaining ships to move toward the asteroid field. We'll use it as cover and make our final stand there." Zane looked up from his console, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Captain, we'll be trapped. The enemy is too strong, and the asteroid field is too dangerous." "I know," Alina replied quietly, "but the asteroid field gives us an advantage. They won't be able to track our movements with their full arsenal. We'll use it as a shield, and we'll fight from the shadows." Her words were filled with conviction. She wasn't about to let her crew die without giving everything they had. And with the enemy regrouping, now was their only chance to strike a decisive blow. "All ships, move into the asteroid field," Alina commanded. "We have one final chance to turn the tide. We fight from there, or we die trying." The fleet followed her orders, the remaining ships scattering into the asteroid field with precision. The field was treacherous, but it offered them the one thing they needed most: time. The enemy had no choice but to follow them into the field, but it would be a slow, dangerous pursuit. As the last of the human fleet entered the asteroid field, Alina felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The plan was risky, but it was the only one they had left. And with it, they had the element of surprise. It was now or never. "Lieutenant Kara," Alina called, her voice steady. "Get me a clear line of communication with the fleet. I need to talk to them." Kara nodded and activated the comms system. A moment later, Alina's voice rang out across the fleet, echoing through every ship's speaker. "Listen up, everyone," Alina said, her words sharp and commanding. "We are humanity's last stand. We fought too hard to give up now. We are the ones who protect the weak, who never back down in the face of fear. This is our fight, our legacy. The galaxy has never seen anything like us." She paused, taking in the image of her crew and the fleet on her screen. "We will not let this enemy destroy everything we stand for. We will not let them erase our humanity. Our courage, our spirit, is the final weapon we have." The crew of the Valiant and the other ships listened intently, their faces etched with determination. Alina's words had done what she intended. They had reignited the flame of hope in her crew. "We will make this our victory," Alina continued. "We'll take down as many of them as we can. And if we fall with honor." The fleet roared in approval, the crew fueled by renewed strength and purpose. Even though the enemy was closing in, even though their situation was desperate, they were ready to fight to the end. "Let's show them who we are," Alina said. The battle began anew as the human fleet emerged from the asteroids. The enemy ships advanced, but their movements were clumsy. They were used to the open space of the battlefield, not the chaotic, ever-shifting terrain of the asteroid field. The humans, however, were quick to adapt, darting in and out of the rocks, launching missile after missile at the unprepared enemy. The Valiant's fighters swarmed the enemy, their nimble maneuvering allowing them to get close enough to strike. Alina watched with a fire in her eyes as her fleet began to push back the enemy. Each victory was hard-earned, but with every blow, the human forces were gaining ground. It was clear that the enemy had underestimated humanity's resilience. But as the battle raged on, a new threat emerged. From the edge of the battlefield, a massive warship, larger than anything they had seen before, appeared. It was an ominous behemoth, its weapons pointed directly at the human fleet. The enemy had been holding back its true power. Alina's heart sank as the ship began firing, sending massive blasts toward the asteroid field. One after another, the asteroids shattered as the blasts struck. The human fleet scrambled to avoid the devastation. "Alina, we can't hold out much longer," Zane shouted. "They're too powerful." But Alina stood firm. She knew this might be their final challenge. The odds were insurmountable, but giving up was never an option. "Prepare for a final assault," Alina ordered, her voice steely with determination. "All remaining fighters, this is our last chance. We take down that warship or we die trying." As the human fleet closed in, the sky seemed to explode with the fury of 1,000 battles. The warship's weapons rained down, but the human fleet was relentless. Fighter ships darted and dived, dodging beams of energy. The asteroid field became their battleground, their final stage to either win or fall. Alina's heart pounded as the Valiant's weapons came online again. This was the final fight, the moment that would decide the fate of humanity. And with the will of the galaxy itself on their side, Alina knew they would not give in. Not now. Not ever. The massive enemy warship loomed before them, its guns blasting with terrifying power. Every moment was a fight for survival, as humanity's last fleet continued to dart through the asteroid field, hoping to avoid total annihilation. Alina's mind raced, her thoughts sharp despite the overwhelming chaos. The enemy had given everything they had, throwing their most powerful weapons at the humans. It seemed impossible to win. "Captain," Zane called urgently, his voice cutting through the noise of the bridge. The warship is targeting us directly. We won't last much longer if we don't do something. Elena stared at the display, watching the enemy warship lock its sights on the Valiant once more. It was relentless, pushing forward with full force, determined to wipe humanity from the galaxy. She clenched her jaw. There was no escaping this. There was only one way out, a way to strike back. "We need to strike first," she said, her voice unwavering. "The only way to win now is to bring down that warship before it destroys us all. We don't have enough time to outmaneuver them anymore." Zane's eyes widened as he realized what she meant. "Captain, are you suggesting we go straight for it? We don't have the firepower to break through its defenses." Elena nodded grimly. "We do now. We'll use the last of our remaining energy reserves for a full charge attack. Every fighter, every ship will join in. We'll make our move while they're focusing on us. This is humanity's final chance." Kara, standing beside Zane, looked at Elena with determined eyes. "We're with you, Captain. We'll make them regret ever underestimating us." The crew was silent for a moment. It was a crazy plan, reckless even, but Elena knew it was their only shot. The enemy might be more powerful, but humanity had always overcome the impossible. Now, they would prove it once again. "Prepare the fleet," Elena shouted. "This is it. No turning back. We're going in full force. Every fighter, every ship, get into position." Zane worked furiously at his console, activating the fleet's final weapon systems. Kara coordinated with the fighters, preparing them for the final assault. Elena stood at the helm, watching the enemy warship grow ever larger on the screen, ready to unleash everything they had left. The Valiant's shields flickered as the first enemy shots slammed into them, but Elena didn't flinch. It was a matter of timing now. They had to strike hard and fast before the warship could charge its weapons for another devastating shot. The fleet moved into position, every ship locked into formation. The final attack was set into motion. It was a do-or-die moment. "All ships," Elena's voice rang through the comms, "we do this for humanity. We fight not just for our survival, but for the future. Charge the warship now." The entire fleet surged forward, blasting through the asteroid field at full speed. The enemy warship fired its weapons in a desperate attempt to stop them, but the human fleet was moving too quickly, too unpredictably. The asteroid field became a labyrinth of rocks and debris, shielding them from some of the incoming blasts. Then, with a roar, the Valiant and its fleet charged directly at the warship. The enemy's guns fired, the beams tearing through space. The ships swerved, dodging blasts, and firing back in unison. A wave of missiles flew from the Valiant, slamming into the warship's hull. The enemy warship staggered under the impact, but it wasn't enough. Elena knew they needed to hit the warship's core to disable it for good. The Valiant's remaining missiles were their only hope. "Zane," Elena yelled, "target the warship's core. Fire everything we've got." Zane's hands flew over the console, and with a final command, he sent every last missile streaking toward the heart of the warship. Time seemed to slow as the missiles flew through the debris-filled space, the massive warship looming ahead like a beast ready to crush them all. The enemy warship's shields flickered as the missiles hit, but they weren't enough. Elena knew they had to make the sacrifice. The Valiant and its crew had to charge straight into the heart of the enemy. "Prepare to board," Elena said, her voice cold with resolve. "Everyone, brace for impact." The crew didn't hesitate. They knew what had to be done. The Valiant surged forward, slamming into the enemy warship's defenses at full speed. The ship shook violently as the hull connected, the impact sending a shockwave through the fleet. Explosions rocked the Valiant, but Elena held steady. She looked up, watching as the final missile strike hit the warship's core, igniting that chain reaction. The warship began to fall apart, its massive structure collapsing inward. The shockwave sent the Valiant tumbling back, the ship's systems failing one by one. "Captain," Zane shouted, struggling to keep the ship steady, "we've done it. The The warship's gone. We won. But Elena could hardly breathe. The Valiant was taking critical damage. The ship was losing power, and the crew was battered from the impact. She knew they'd won, but at what cost? The bridge went dark, and Elena felt a sinking sensation in her chest. She wasn't sure how much longer they could stay afloat. The warship had been destroyed, but the fight had taken everything. The emergency lights flickered back on, revealing a battered, broken crew, but their faces were filled with relief. Humanity had won. Against all odds, they had won. Elena looked out at the stars, her heart heavy but full of pride. Humanity had proven itself. They had protected the weak, stood firm in the face of destruction, and never gave up. The galaxy may have fallen, but humanity stood resolute. They were the last hope, and they would rebuild, no matter what it took.